The Riverdale Galleria Mall gleamed under the soft autumn sunlight, its glass roof catching the rays and spilling them in golden sheets onto the polished marble floors. It was Saturday afternoon in Illinois, and the mall was alive with its usual weekend symphony kids begging for ice cream. Teenagers clustered in packs near the arcade, couples drifting hand in hand from store to store. The air carried that curious blend of pretzel stands, perfume counters, and fresh leather from a shoe store down the hall. For Sandra Williams, this day was supposed to be nothing more than a pause button. 20 years on the force, to decades of patrols, investigations, late-night calls, and the impossible weight of wearing a captain's badge had left her tired but unbroken. She had faced armed standoffs, domestic disputes, grieving families, and endless bureaucracy. Yet today was about something simple. She was here to buy a birthday present for her niece, Kayla, just a bracelet, something bright and delicate, the kind of gift a young girl would treasure and slip on every morning, as a reminder that her aunt believed in her. Sandra's purse swung gently at her side as she walked with measured confidence, her navy sweater soft against the chill of the mall's air conditioning. She hummed to herself, scanning the storefronts for the jewelry boutique she knew Kayla adored. Her thoughts floated easily, away from paperwork and departmental politics. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to relax, but the peace didn't last long. In the reflection of a shoe store window, she caught it, to figures trailing her at what they must have thought was a discreet distance. Collins, tall and broad-shouldered with a buzz cut, spoke into his radio while staring directly at her. Reed, his shorter, weary partner, hovered uneasily, eyes darting between Sandra and Collins like a rookie caught in a bad decision. Sandra's jaw tightened. She'd seen this too many times before. When you're black, even in plain clothes, you're never just a shopper. You're a potential suspect, a shadow to be watched. Her years on the force had sharpened her instincts. She knew surveillance when she felt it. The slow, circling steps, the unnecessary chatter on radios, the weight of eyes pressing into her back. And sure enough, Collins's voice carried just enough to be heard over the mall's background noise. Black female, brown leather bag, blue sweater, keeping eyes on. Her fingers curled into fists, nails digging into her palm. Rage threatened to push up her throat like bile. She could spin around, flash her badge, and watch the color drain from their faces. She could end this charade in seconds. But Sandra wasn't here as Captain Williams. She wasn't here to make a scene. She was just Kayla's aunt, shopping for a bracelet. She inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower, forcing her shoulders to relax. Not today. She whispered under her breath. She stepped into Miller & Co. Jewelry Boutique, the glass doors sighing shut behind her. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The air was cooler, perfumed with vanilla candles, and soft jazz floated from invisible speakers. Rows of glass cases sparkled under spotlights, each filled with gold chains, diamond studs, and charm bracelets that winked like secrets waiting to be kept. But the warmth didn't last. Behind the counter, a middle-aged white woman stiffened. Her blazer was sharp, her blonde bob precise, and her smile strained like it had been stitched onto her face. Her name tag read Karen Miller, owner and manager. "Can I help you?" Karen's tone sliced through the mellow music, her eyes narrowing slightly as they scanned Sandra up and down. "Just browsing, thanks," Sandra replied evenly, her voice calm though her pulse hammered against her ribs. She moved toward a display case lined with charm bracelets, the exact kind Kayla had been hinting about for weeks. Through the glass, she could see tiny silver hearts, golden stars, and a delicate bracelet with a butterfly charm that practically called her niece's name. Yet she couldn't ignore Karen's reflection in the case's mirror, hovering, watching every movement, eyes fixed not on the jewelry, but on Sandra's purse. Outside the store's glass walls, Collins and Reed loitered, pretending to study the mall's directory map. "They weren't fooling anyone. These cases are locked," Karen announced suddenly, stepping closer until she was just at Sandra's elbow. "Merchandise can only be removed by staff." Sandra glanced at her calmly. "I understand. When I'm ready to see something, I'll let you know." Karen didn't move away. If anything, she leaned in closer, her perfume cloying. Her gaze flicked again to the purse on Sandra's shoulder. Sandra's heart rate quickened, but her expression remained neutral. She'd lived this scene too many times. The assumption, the scrutiny, the subtle message that she didn't belong here. Not in this store. Not in this space. She tried to focus back on the bracelet. Kayla would love the butterfly charm. She could picture her niece's smile, bright and unguarded. That thought steadied her. But behind it, anger simmered like a storm cloud, because Sandra knew what was coming next. She saw Collins shifting outside, already speaking into his radio. She saw Reed's nervous glances, and she felt the weight of Karen's suspicion pressing heavier with every second. This wasn't about jewelry anymore. This was about her skin. And Sandra Williams, after 20 years of serving the law, was about to be treated as if she were its enemy. The Jason Miller and Co. kept playing, the same lazy saxophone loop, but the sound felt thinner now, as if the room itself had begun to hold its breath. Sandra stood before the charm bracelets, letting her eyes drift along the neat line of tiny silver shapes, hearts, stars. A small letter K she could add for Kayla. It should have been a simple joy, a quiet moment of choosing. Instead, she felt the stare in her back like a thumb pressed into a bruise. Karen stepped closer again. If you want to see something, you'll need to tell me exactly which item, and I'll take it out for you. Of course, Sandra said, keeping her voice even. Could I take a look at the butterfly charm bracelet? Karen hesitated, just long enough to make it a performance. Fine. She produced a small key from a chain at her waist, slid it into the case, and lifted the glass with ritualistic care. She reached in and retrieved the bracelet by the card it hung on, pinching it between the manicured fingers like she might catch something from it. She placed it on a velvet pad in front of Sandra, but her hand did not move away. It hovered, guarding. It's lovely, Sandra said, lifting the corner of the velvet with a fingertip to see the clasp. How much is? The door chimed. Collins and Reed drifted in, their walk casual in the way that only people used to being unquestioned can manage. They pretended to examine a tray of cufflinks while looking everywhere else. Reed's eyes skittered. Collins's didn't. His gaze slid in a straight line from Sandra's face to her purse and stayed there. We're just browsing, Collins announced to the air. The way a wolf might hum to itself among sheep. Karen brightened at their presence, as if the room had suddenly tilted in her favor. Gentlemen, she chirped, let me know if you need assistance. Reed nodded. Collins didn't bother. He spoke softly into his radio again, and even the velvet seemed to stiffen. Sandra's pulse beat in the base of her throat. She placed the bracelet down carefully. I think this is the one. Karen's eyebrows lifted in disbelief before she could smooth them down. You'd like to purchase it? Yes. And how will you be paying today? Card, Sandra said, because everyone paid by card, because the question was absurd. She reached toward her purse. Karen's hand shot out, fast as a trap snapping shut. It didn't touch. Sandra didn't have to. The message was clear. Before we do anything, Karen said brightly, I'll need to check your bag. Silence crowded the space between them. Even the saxophone seemed to slip out of rhythm. Sandra blinked. Excuse me. It's store policy, Karen said, that careful smile stitched on tight. We reserve the right to inspect bags if merchandise is at risk. At risk, Sandra repeated. She looked at the bracelet on the velvet pad, at the locked glass case, at the two security guards pretending to admire cufflinks no one buys. You've watched me the entire time. You unlocked the case yourself. I haven't touched anything except to look. Karen's eyes flicked to Collins and back. Ma'am, this is standard procedure. It won't take a second. No, Sandra said. Calm, final. You have no right to search my personal property without probable cause. The word probable caused something to tighten in Karen's jaw, a flinch she couldn't suppress. People who bluff with rules usually flinch at the real ones. Karen recovered quickly. Then I'll have to ask you to leave. For what reason? Sandra asked. For refusing a simple request that we make of everyone. They both knew that was a lie. Lies have a particular odor in public, sickly sweet, hard to miss. A young couple near the door paused, the girl's brow knitting as if she'd walked into a draft. Further back, a man in a ball cap held his phone low and at an angle the way people think is discreet. Outside, at the glass, two teenage girls stopped to press their faces closer, hands cupped to block the glare. You're asking to search my bag because of who I am, Sandra said, Not loud. Not soft, just clear enough to cut through the perfume haze. Because I'm a black woman standing in your boutique, holding a purse you've decided you don't like. Karen's smile cracked. Ma'am, please don't make this about what it's already about. Sandra asked. Collins set down the cufflink tray with a clack, as if the sound could settle the quiver in the room. He stepped forward, folding his hands in front of him like a bouncer at a velvet rope. Afternoon, he said. His voice had the flattening quality of someone who never expects to be disagreed with. We've had some incidents recently. The manager has the right to verify merchandise has not been compromised. Nothing has been compromised, Sandra said, the absurdity of the word scalding on her tongue. The only thing compromised here is my afternoon. Reed hovered on Collins's shoulder, his voice small. Maybe if she just shows us, we can all move on. Sandra looked at him, and the flicker of discomfort in his eyes reminded her of rookies on their first bad call. The ones who know something's wrong, but not how to stop it. This is harassment, Sandra said. Turning back to Karen, you followed me the moment I walked in. You watched my purse instead of the jewelry. You summoned security before I even asked the price. If I were a white woman, this conversation would be about gift wrap. A murmured yes rolled from the door. The girl from the couple nodded, eyes flashing. The man in the ball cap lifted his phone higher. Karen saw it to the phone's tilted like sunflowers tracking light. She smoothed her blazer lapels with trembling fingers. I'll call the police, she announced. Louder now, as if volume could transform suspicion into fact. If you have nothing to hide, you should have no problem cooperating. Sandra felt the old heat rise, the kind that used to flood her limbs during raids and standoffs, the kind that steadied her aim and cooled her voice. She placed both hands on the counter in plain sight, palms open, dignified in a way that made the velvet look cheap. I have nothing to hide, she said. I also have nothing to surrender to your prejudice. Collins's radio crackled like a gun misfiring. Unit 7, a voice chirped. Possible shoplifting at Miller & Co. requesting patrol. Reed blanched. We didn't say. Collins didn't look at him. Copy that, he said into the mic. Karen exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. Relief washed her features into something harder, meaner. She moved the bracelet back an inch, as though it needed rescuing. What exactly did you report? Sandra asked, eyes on Collins. Per store request, Collins said. Potential theft. Potential, Sandra repeated. A beautiful word. Empty. But it sounds so official, Mum. Karen said, and now there was no sweetener in her voice at all. You are making everyone uncomfortable. Sandra glanced around. The couple near the door stood shoulder to shoulder, not moving. The teenage girls outside had started recording openly. The man in the ball cap had been joined by another with a camera that looked expensive. Uncomfortable was not the word in the air now. Charged was, witness was, enough was, uncomfortable. Sandra said, is the price of pretending bias is good customer service. The door chimed again. A hush swept through the boutique so quickly the saxophone seemed to drown in it. The man who stepped through wore a patrol uniform, dark and crisp, badge gleaming. He moved like a bulldozer wearing a smile broad shoulders. Square jaw, a swagger that didn't bother with doors because people opened for him. Officer Bradley Rains. Sandra knew the type before she knew the name later. She would remember she knew the name too. Rains surveyed the room in a single sweep, landing on Sandra the way a hawk lands on a field mouse. What seems to be the issue? He asked, and the question was theater. He had already decided the answer. Karen pointed. She refused a bag check and attempted to. That's false, Sandra said. The words calm but precise, cut to fit. I attempted to buy a bracelet. Collins stepped in front of Karen as if he were a curtain. Officer, we've had thefts. She matches a description. Sandra tilted her head. Black, with a purse. Rains smiled without warmth. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to cooperate. Define cooperate. Sandra said, open your bag. Rains replied, as if he were asking her to breathe. And if I decline, then we proceed with a search, he said, resting a heavy hand on the metal clasp of his cuffs, letting the gesture do the talking. Either way, I get to look in that bag. The phones rose higher. A boy outside pressed his forehead to the glass, eyes wide. The boutique had become a theater box, everyone with a perfect view. No one sure which act this was. Probable cause, Sandra asked, the two words clear enough to make Reed flinch again. Raines's gaze slid past her to the crowd as if he were scenting wind. He liked an audience. It made him bigger. "We can do this easy," he said, deceptively soft. "Or we can do this my way." Sandra looked at the bracelet. The butterfly charm caught the light and flashed. Kayla's face lifted in her mind and held. "Your way," Sandra said quietly, "seems to come with its own weather." Raines took a step closer, suffocating distance into none. "Last chance," he murmured. Sandra met his eyes. Years of service steadied her spine. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move. She gave him the only thing she could that would not shrink her. "No." The word hung in the perfumed air like a bell that never stops ringing. Raines's smile vanished. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Collins shifted his weight. Reed swallowed. Karen's breath snagged outside the glass. The crowd surged like a tide finding shore. Phones angled, mouths opened. The saxophone finally faltered. A single note stretched too long. Then cut. Sandra didn't turn. Instead, she said very clearly, "For the cameras, for the girl at the door, for the boy outside with his forehead against the glass, I will not consent to an unlawful search." Raines's jaw worked. The cuffs clicked open in his hand, small bright teeth gleaming. "Then you're under arrest." The cuffs and Officer Bradley Raines's hand gleamed under the boutique's track lighting, the metallic click echoing like a gavel slamming down. The sound turned the air brittle. Sandra stood perfectly still, her chin lifted. Her eyes locked on his with a calm that wasn't surrender, but defiance. "Turn around," Raines ordered. His voice was loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, projecting authority he didn't truly possess. "Hands behind your back." Sandra didn't move. Years in uniform had trained her body not to twitch, not to flinch, not to give away an inch of ground to bullies cloaked in badges round them. The boutique seemed to shrink. The sweet vanilla perfume that once masked insecurity now clung like smoke after a fire. "Sir," Reed said softly from Raines's side, his words nearly swallowed by tension. "Maybe we should—" "Quiet," Raines barked, shutting him down before the sentence could live. Collins took a step closer, broad chest puffed out as though he could crowd Sandra into compliance. Customers outside pressed against the glass storefront, phones angled high, recording every second. The couple who'd lingered near the door now stood firm, the young woman's eyes fierce. Her phone steady. Sandra inhaled, slow and deliberate, letting the moment lengthen. She knew every camera in the corridor was trained on her, and she knew exactly what they were capturing. A black woman refusing to bend, refusing to submit to humiliation. "This is harassment," she said, her voice steady, loud enough to ripple across the shop floor. "You have no probable cause. You are targeting me because of the color of my skin." Raines's lips twisted into a grin that wasn't humor. Save the speech for booking. He lunged forward, gripping her wrist. The movement was sharp, calculated to show dominance. Sandra felt the familiar surge of adrenaline rush through her, the instinct to counter, to twist free, to drop him with a technique she could execute in her sleep. But she forced herself to hold back. Not here. Not in front of dozens of civilians with cameras. She wasn't just protecting herself, she was building a case, brick by brick, second by second. The cold steel of the cuff snapped around her wrist. The sound cut through the murmurs outside, and the crowd erupted into angry shouts. "Let her go," someone yelled. "This is racial profiling." Another voice rang out. "Record everything." Phones shot higher. Some people stepped into the doorway, refusing to be brushed aside. Karen's face flushed crimson behind the counter. For a flicker of a moment, doubt cracked her mask, but pride stitched it back in place. She folded her arms, watching the spectacle she had unleashed. Raines shoved Sandra's other arm behind her back and clicked the cuffs shut. He raised his voice, puffed his chest, and turned to the audience like an actor bowing mid-play. "Should have just cooperated," he announced, smirking. The crowd booed. Reed's hands twitched at his sides, his discomfort written plainly across his pale face. Collins remained impassive, his eyes cold. his stance defensive. Sandra's purse slid from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a thud. Rains kicked it aside, as though discarding evidence he had invented. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for suspicion of shoplifting," Rains declared, loud and smug. Savoring the words, Sandra twisted her neck just enough to look over her shoulder. "Suspicion isn't evidence, and everything you're doing is on record." Her words rippled through the crowd like sparks. A chant began, low at first, then louder. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Rains gritted his teeth. He yanked Sandra toward the boutique door. The cuffs cut into her wrists, biting, but her posture remained unbroken. Her eyes scanning the gathering mass. More phones lifted. A child sat on his father's shoulders, recording with wide, solemn eyes. As Rains dragged her into the mall's main corridor, the Saturday bustle had shifted. Families with strollers stopped in their tracks. Shoppers abandoned their bags to join the swelling crowd. The fountain's gentle splash was drowned by voices, angry and incredulous. "Why are you arresting her?" Someone shouted. "She didn't do anything." Another cried. Sandra raised her voice, clear as a bell. "I am Captain Sandra Williams, 20 years with the Chicago Police Department, and I am being falsely arrested." Gasps broke out. The chant wavered, then surged louder. "Captain Williams." Someone repeated, voice cracking with outrage. "She's a police captain." Rains jerked on the cuffs. "Save it," he muttered, his face hardening. But Sandra's words had already landed. The name traveled through the crowd, whispered, shouted, shared with every recording phone. She saw it in their eyes, the realization, the fury, the understanding that what they were witnessing wasn't just harassment. It was the exposure of a system rotten to its core. They reached the side exit of the mall where Rains's patrol car waited, its lights off but presence looming. The late afternoon sun seared against Sandra's skin as she stumbled slightly on the threshold. The sudden brightness forcing her to squint, she straightened, looked directly at the cameras, and repeated, "I am Captain Sandra Williams, and this is racial profiling." The crowd roared in agreement. Dozens of voices rose in chorus. "Let her go. Justice for Sandra. Stop police corruption." Rains's grip tightened, his jaw working as he tried to keep control of the narrative. But the tide had already shifted. Every second was being recorded, every angle preserved. Sandra's heart pounded not from fear, but from clarity. She wasn't just a victim of prejudice in this moment. She was a witness to her own arrest, a voice carried by hundreds who refused to look away. And somewhere inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The metal cuffs cut into Sandra's wrists with every step, sharp reminders of humiliation disguised as procedure. Officer Bradley Rains paraded her through the mall corridor like a hunter dragging a trophy, ignoring the sea of phones and the growing roar of voices. His smirk widened with every shout, as if the outrage only fed his appetite for control. Sandra kept her chin high, refusing to let him see the sting in her skin or the heat in her chest. She'd faced worse than this, but never under circumstances so nakedly unjust. Never as herself an off-duty captain reduced, in his eyes, to nothing more than a suspect with the wrong skin in the wrong store. The crowd swelled behind them, spilling out from the boutique into the wide artery of the mall. Shoppers abandoned food court trays, bags, and idle conversations to join the throng. The chant rose like a storm breaking. "Let her go. Let her go." Reed followed at a distance, pale and jittery, his eyes darting between Sandra, the cameras, and his partner's tightening jaw. Collins kept his expression hard, his posture stiff, but even he seemed to register the way people pressed closer. No longer content to be passive witnesses, Rains reached the mall's side exit, yanking the door open with his free hand. Sunlight blazed in, flooding the polished floor. The sudden brightness revealed more than the transition from indoors to out. It lit the doubt, spreading across his face. For the first time, his grip faltered as the crowd's fury poured into the parking lot behind them. Sandra stopped moving. She planted her feet and turned, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Before you take another step," she said clearly, her voice carrying like a verdict, "you should know who I am. Save it." Rains snapped, tugging at her arm. "You can tell your story downtown." Sandra's voice sharpened, cutting through his dismissal. "I am Captain Sandra Williams, Chicago Police Department, 20 years of service." And you're making the biggest mistake of your career." The words detonated in the crowd. Gasps burst into shouts. Phones angled higher, capturing every syllable. Raines's smirk cracked, then returned in brittle form. "Yeah, anyone can claim that. Where's your proof?" Sandra twisted her cuffed hands enough to flash the inside of her wrist, where her badge number was tattooed a quiet, permanent mark she'd chosen years ago to honor her father, also a cop. "Check your system," she said. "Run my name. The truth will humiliate you faster than I ever could." For a split second, Raines hesitated. His eyes flicked to Reed, whose lips parted as if to speak, then shut again. Collins scowled but didn't step forward. The crowd surged, shouting louder, the chant changing now. "She's a captain. She's a captain." A ripple of authority broke through the noise. "What the hell is going on here?" The voice belonged to Sergeant Marcus Watkins, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding without effort. He pushed through the line of onlookers, his uniform immaculate, his face carved in controlled displeasure. The crowd parted for him, their phones still rolling. "Sergeant," Raines started, his confidence faltering for the first time. "We've got a theft suspect." She resisted a bag check. Watkins's gaze landed on Sandra, then on the cuffs. His jaw clenched. "Raines," he said, voice low but heavy with steel, "do you know who you've got in those cuffs?" Raines blinked, thrown off balance. "She claimed to be." "Claimed?" Watkins barked, the single word silencing the corridor. He stepped closer, his finger stabbing the air toward the cuffs. "That is Captain Williams, your commanding officer's commanding officer. The badge she carries outranks you twice over, and you've just paraded her through a shopping mall like a criminal." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the chant stuttered into stunned murmurs. All eyes turned to Raines, whose face drained of color before flushing an angry red. Reed's voice cracked the quiet. "Sarge, I told him maybe we should—" "Quiet, Reed," Collins muttered. But his own jaw was tight now, his certainty bleeding. Watkins turned to Sandra. "Captain, are you all right?" Sandra's shoulders straightened. "I'll be fine once these cuffs are off." Watkins's glare returned to Raines, who still held the chain with a grip that had turned clammy. "You heard her. Remove them. Now." Raines's hand trembled as he fumbled with the key. The click of the cuffs unlocking reverberated louder than a gunshot. Sandra pulled her wrists free, red marks circling her skin, and lifted them for the cameras to see. The crowd erupted into cheers, anger transmuted into vindication. Chants of justice for Sandra shook the air, filling the parking lot with raw energy. Raines dropped the cuffs, his face a mask of fury barely held in check. Watkins's voice cut through the clamor one final time. "You've embarrassed this department enough. For one day, officer. Step back." For once, Raines obeyed. Sandra bent to pick up her purse, steady despite the adrenaline raging in her veins. She faced the cameras once more, her voice unwavering. "Today, you all witnessed what happens every day in America. This time, it happened to me, and I won't let it be buried." The crowd roared again, their voices rising like a wave that could no longer be contained. And deep inside, Sandra knew the truth. This wasn't just about her arrest. It was about exposing a system that had thrived too long on silence. And now, silence was no longer an option. That night, Sandra sat alone in her home office, the glow of her desk lamp spilling across a stack of reports, her badge resting silently beside her laptop. The adrenaline from the mall had drained away, leaving a sharp, hollow ache in its place. She flexed her wrist's red circles still marked where Raines's cuffs had dug in. Every pulse of pain was a reminder, but pain wasn't new. What was new was the clarity. This wasn't just about her humiliation in Riverdale Galleria Mall. No, this was a machine, and she had just seen one gear grind to life in public. Now she had to trace the machine's design. Sandra pulled open a drawer and retrieved a folder she'd been keeping for months. False arrest complaints, whispers from community meetings, stories from young black men and women who said they'd been stopped, searched, or cuffed inside the very same mall. Most had given up. A few had tried to fight. All had been brushed aside as isolated incidents. She spread the papers out across the desk. "Isolated," she muttered, shaking her head. Patterns jumped out immediately to a trained eye. Dates aligned. Officers repeated. Charges duplicated like copy and paste crimes. She circled one name in red ink, Officer Bradley Rains. Case after case had his signature resisting arrest. Disorderly conduct, theft suspicions that never turned into convictions. Each one ended the same way, a plea deal, a probation order, and monthly fees siphoned out of families who could least afford them. Sandra's chest tightened. She'd seen this playbook before, in different uniforms, under different policies. But the result was always the same, exploitation dressed as justice. She dug deeper, opening her laptop, searching departmental records she still had clearance to access. Arrest logs filled the screen. In the past 12 months alone, 47 arrests at Riverdale Galleria Mall. Over 80% of them were black residents. And in nearly every one, the charges were vague. Flimsy, loitering, suspicious behavior, failure to comply. Sandra's pen moved fast, drawing arrows, connecting names and dates like a detective on a crime drama wall. But this was no TV show. This was her city. Her department. Her search led her to something that made her pulse spike. A memo buried in an administrative folder, outlining a community safety partnership between the Chicago Police Department and a private company, Liberty Supervision Services. Sandra clicked. Her screen filled with financial jargon. But the meaning was clear. Liberty was a probation management firm, and its parent company, Riverdale Holdings, the same corporation that owned the mall. She leaned back in her chair, heart thudding. It wasn't random. It wasn't incompetence. It was a pipeline. Arrest at the mall, feed the probation system, collect fees. A cycle of profit fueled by prejudice. God, she whispered, pinching the bridge of her nose. A sharp knock at her door jolted her. She reached instinctively for the off-duty weapon holstered at her desk's edge. "Who is it?" "It's me," a voice answered softly. "Carla." Sandra lowered the weapon, exhaling. Carla was her closest friend on the force, one of the few who had stayed by her side through storms of departmental politics. Carla stepped in, her face drawn tight. "I saw the videos, San. You okay?" Sandra gestured at the papers spread across the desk. "Physically, sure, but this," she tapped the folder. "This goes way deeper than Rains humiliating me in a mall. It's a racket." Carla leaned over, scanning the documents. 47 cases? And that's just the ones I can confirm." Carla's expression darkened. "You know how this department plays it. They'll say the footage doesn't tell the full story. They'll claim you escalated. They'll turn it on you." Sandra's jaw clenched. "I know, which is why I need more than witness videos. I need the paper trail. The money." Carla hesitated. "You're poking a hornet's nest. And you know how they deal with black officers who make waves. I don't care." Sandra's voice was sharp, final. "If I back down now, I might as well hand Rains the cuffs myself." The silence stretched, heavy with truth neither wanted to name. Finally, Carla nodded. "Then let's do it smart. Quiet. You gather, I'll cover. But be careful. They won't let this go easy." Sandra turned back to the files, her pulse steady now, fueled by something stronger than fear, resolve. Hours later, as the city outside quieted into the hum of midnight traffic, Sandra's desk was covered in notes and highlighted reports. Arrows connected officers to arrests, arrests to Liberty Supervision Services, Liberty to Riverdale Holdings. The pattern was undeniable. And at the center, again and again, was the same name, Bradley Rains. Sandra leaned back, eyes burning, hands trembling slightly from fatigue and fury. She whispered the truth aloud, as if saying it could make the world listen. "They're not just profiling. They're profiting." Morning sunlight spilled through Sandra's blinds, streaking her desk in pale gold. She hadn't slept much. The files were still spread across the oak surface, her badge resting silently in the corner like a silent witness. Coffee steamed beside her, bitter and black, but her nerves were sharper than caffeine. A knock sounded at the front door. 3 short raps, steady. Sandra's hand slid to her sidearm. After last night's revelations, paranoia wasn't paranoia, it was precaution. She peered through the peephole. A woman stood there, mid-30s, olive skin, dark hair pulled back in a braid. A laminated press badge dangled from her lanyard. "Maya Lopez, City Herald." Sandra opened the door halfway. "You're brave showing up unannounced." Maya smiled faintly. "You're brave shopping in Riverdale Galleria. Guess we both take risks." Sandra studied her for a beat, then stepped aside. "Comin', inside." Maya sat at the edge of a chair, eyes sharp and scanning. She didn't bother with small talk. She placed her phone on the table, recording light blinking red. "I've been digging into Officer Raines for 6 months," Maya said. "The mall incident confirmed what I already suspected." Sandra arched a brow. "Which is that he's not just a bad cop. He's a cog in a machine." Maya slid a manila envelope across the table. "Documents, financial records, sworn statements. Families ruined by false arrests. Pressured into probation programs run by Liberty Supervision Services, a company that is owned by Riverdale Holdings." Sandra finished, nodding. "I found that connection last night." Maya's lips twitched into a grim smile. "Then you know what we're up against. This isn't sloppy policing. It's business. Arrest quotas feed into probation fees. Probation fees feed into shareholders. It's systemic exploitation." Sandra flipped through the papers. Affidavits describing intimidation. Plea deals coerced with threats. Even a single mother who was told her kids would be taken if she fought charges. Each line tightened Sandra's chest. "They're targeting black residents," Sandra said. Maya nodded. "Over 90% of cases I've documented. It's racial profiling with a profit margin." Sandra exhaled slowly. Fury and focus battling for space. "If we can prove this, it could bring down more than just Raines." "Exactly," Maya said. "But proving it is the hard part." That night, Sandra returned home from a shift to find an envelope shoved under her door. No return address. Her gut clenched even before she opened it. Inside were photographs. One showed Kayla walking to school. Another, Sandra's house from across the street. And then the photo of Sandra in cuffs at the mall, a red crosshair drawn over her face. She dropped the envelope onto the table like it was poison. Maya called an hour later. Her voice was shaky. "They came after me too." "What happened?" Sandra demanded. "I was leaving the office. Someone shoved me from behind, grabbed my bag. I fought. They ran. When I checked, all my files on Raines were gone." Sandra gripped the phone harder. "Are you hurt?" "Bruised, nothing broken. But they knew what to take." Sandra stared at the photos on her table. The message was clear. "Stop digging. Or else, they're scared," Sandra said finally, voice low but steady. "Scared enough to show their teeth." 2 nights later, Sandra sat in her kitchen with Carla, Maya, and Reverend Green, a community leader who'd lost congregants to these bogus arrests. They spread the evidence across the table: arrest records, financial reports, photos of victims. "They're trying to silence us," Reverend Green said, pointing to the hate mail Sandra had received. "But they've made a mistake. They've shown their hand." Maya leaned forward. "We need to go public before they bury this. If we wait, they'll twist the narrative, make Sandra the angry black captain and me the biased reporter. We need undeniable proof." Sandra nodded. "We'll get it. But we do this smart. Step by step." The threats didn't stop. More envelopes arrived, newspaper clippings about officers killed in the line of duty. Anonymous letters dripping with slurs. One morning, Sandra found a dead crow on her porch, its wings spread like a dark omen. Kayla, staying over for the weekend, discovered it first. The fear in her niece's eyes nearly broke Sandra's resolve, but only nearly. Sandra gathered the threats into a box, sealed it, and set it on her desk. Proof, she told herself, not intimidation. Evidence of desperation. And with every new piece, her resolve hardened. If they thought she would scare, they had picked the wrong woman. By the end of that week, Sandra had mapped it out. Dozens of false arrests, financial ties between Liberty Supervision Services and Riverdale Holdings, direct involvement of Raines, repeatedly tied to these cases. But she also knew something else. The danger was escalating, and the next move she made would either break the machine wide open or make her its next victim. The city council chamber was already overflowing when Sandra arrived. Protesters packed the steps outside, their chants rising into the evening air. Justice for Sandra. End racial profiling. Banners and hand-painted signs bobbed above the sea of heads. Phones lit up the night like a constellation, ready to record every word, every outcome. Inside, the chamber buzzed with tension. Reporters filled the aisles, cameras angled toward the podium. Council members shuffled papers, their faces tight with unease. They weren't just managing a meeting, they were managing a scandal that had already spilled far beyond their control. Sandra sat in the front row, Maya beside her, her arm still in a sling from the attack. Reverend Green leaned against the bench behind them, his steady presence like an anchor. Carla stood near the back, in uniform, a silent show of solidarity. When Sandra's name was called, she rose slowly, deliberately, and walked to the podium. Phones lifted higher. A hush fell over the room. "My name is Captain Sandra Williams," she began, voice steady, carrying. "2 weeks ago, I was falsely arrested in Riverdale Galleria Mall. Many of you saw the video. You saw an officer ignore my words, my dignity, my rights. But what happened to me is only one piece of a system designed to exploit." She placed a thick folder on the podium and opened it. Inside were arrest records, financial reports, sworn affidavits. For the past year, 47 residents, most of them black, have been arrested at Riverdale Galleria. The charges are vague, the evidence non-existent, but the outcome is the same: probation through Liberty Supervision Services, a private company owned by the same corporation that owns the mall. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Sandra's voice cut sharper. Every month, those probationers pay fees, hundreds of dollars, drained from families already struggling. Fees that funnel back into Riverdale Holdings, into Liberty, into the pockets of people who see human lives as numbers on a balance sheet. She held up a document, highlighted lines visible even from a distance. Here, a memo outlining bonuses for mall security staff based on arrest numbers, arrest quotas. "This isn't about public safety, it's about profit." Gasps broke out. A council member shifted uncomfortably. Another scribbled notes furiously. And here, Sandra continued, her voice rising, "is the money trail. Payments routed through shell companies, landing in private accounts tied to elected officials and judges. Kickbacks for keeping the machine alive." She looked directly at the mayor seated at the center of the dais. "The city has been selling its citizens into debt bondage, disguised as law enforcement." The chamber erupted, shouts, gasps, the flash of cameras. The council president banged a gavel, but it was useless against the tide of fury. At that moment, Maya stood, holding her phone high. On the screen played the boutique's surveillance footage she had unearthed and edited, undeniable. It showed Raines whispering to the store manager before Sandra ever walked in, orchestrating the setup. It showed Collins and Reed circling like vultures. It showed Sandra calm, restrained, refusing an unlawful search. And then it showed Raines slapping cuffs on her wrists. The footage looped, projected onto screens round the chamber. Gasps turned into shouts. Council members leaned forward. "Blanching." Mayor Thompson cleared his throat, voice trembling. "This council will order an immediate independent investigation into all matters raised here tonight." But the people weren't waiting for procedure. Outside, the chants grew louder, echoing into the chamber itself. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" Raines, seated at the back in full uniform, shot to his feet. Fury etched into every line of his face. "This is a witch hunt," he shouted, pointing at Sandra. "She's making this all up." 2 officers moved in. But it wasn't until Sergeant Watkins stepped forward that the room truly stilled. He held out his hand. "Officer Bradley Raines, you're under arrest. Corruption, conspiracy, and abuse of power." Gasps exploded again. Cameras whirred. Raines's eyes locked on Sandra, poison in his stare, but she didn't flinch. As Watkins read him his rights, cuffs clicked shut, not on her this time, but on the man who had tried to break her. The chamber shook with applause and chants. Sandra's throat tightened, not with fear, but with the raw weight of vindication. Days later, Riverdale Galleria Mall stood eerily quiet, police tape stretched across shuttered entrances. Inside, Sandra walked with Kayla by her side, the girl's small hand wrapped in hers. Staff greeted her differently now, not with suspicion, but with gratitude, reverence even. Kayla looked up at her. "Does this mean it's over?" Sandra squeezed her hand gently. "No, baby girl, this fight isn't over. But we won today." They stopped in front of the jewelry boutique. The butterfly bracelet glimmered in the case, untouched, waiting. This time, no eyes followed Sandra with suspicion. No guards circled. She bought it. Not just for Kayla's birthday, but as a reminder that even in a system built on injustice, courage could break the gears. Outside the mall, protesters still marched, voices raised high. Justice for Sandra. Justice for all. Sandra lifted her niece's hand, the bracelet jingling faintly, and whispered to herself, this time, they can't bury it.